All right, amazing. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. I just want to get things sorted out over here, get everyone, or give everyone rather, an opportunity to hop on and get settled and comfortable, find their way in. Welcome to the space. If you could please open up the chat box. There's a few of you that are here with me live already, which is great. I'm so happy to see you. If you could please open up the chat box. So along the bottom of Zoom, there's a ribbon and there's a little button for chat. If you could just open up the chat box and just say hi, let me know that you can hear and see me okay. And also just adjust my camera. So if you could just do that and let me know, because I need to make sure that you can hear me. Less concerned if you can see me, although that would be nice as well. But I really just want to make sure that you can hear and see me okay, because I could sit here and talk for the next hour and then discover that you couldn't hear a word I was saying. So that would not be lovely. So if one of you would be brave enough, please open up the chat. There's a few of you here. If you could just please open up the chat, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to dive in. And if you can't hear me, I'm sorry. You can see me. Amazing. Thank you. Can you hear me? You can hear me. All right. Thank you. I appreciate your bravery and for stepping up to the plate today and taking one for the team. All right, awesome. So now I know I can proceed. So here's the other thing that I'm hoping or was hoping to achieve from having you open up the chat box. The second thing I would really love for you to do is in that chat box, let me know what you're hoping to get out of today's masterclass. Whatever symptoms it is that you are struggling with, if it's bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, reflux, heartburn, indigestion, if it's fibroids, heavy, long, painful periods, endometriosis, adenomyosis, if it's iron deficiency, exhaustion, mood swings, raging PMS, drop that into the chat box, because I really want to be able to customize everything that we're talking about today to those things. Because I could go on and on and on about bloating and gas, for example. And if you're like, well, that doesn't apply to me, then what good is it? Right? It's not the best use of your time. I want to make sure that you're getting what you need today. So I'd love for you to drop that into the chat. And then the other thing too is this is where all of the questions are going to happen as we're chatting today. I do not use the Q&A function. I think there's like 2 or 3 different functions in chat where you can ask questions and raise your hand and do all of these fancy things. Just drop things into the chat, please, because I'm here focused on trying to provide you with insights and knowledge and education and all of the information that you need. I'm not going to be looking in, 3, 4, 5 different places to see if there's a question here or there or all over the place. I'm going to get squirrely and then things are going to get lost. So everything is in the chat. So please open up the chat and use it. Fibroids, bloating, gas, acid reflux. Okay, good to know. So continue to drop that into the chat for me so I can really comment on some of those things for you, provide you with some insights today in that regard. And then, of course, if at any point in time there are questions, pop them into the chat. I may not answer it right away. I may say, you know what, I've got something in a little bit coming that is going to really address that for you. Hang tight, put a pin in it for just a moment. Or I might say, we're going to hold that one until the end. Okay, I will answer all of your questions though, I promise. Fibroids, bloating, thyroid nodules. Okay, definitely connected to the gut. So one thing that I want to do first and foremost, let me make sure again that I'm recording. I am recording. I've forgotten to record a couple of times recently, and I'm just really wanting to make sure I record. One thing that I really want to start out with today is talking about signs and symptoms that your gut is in need of some TLC. because one of the biggest mistakes that I see women make is assuming that because they're not bloated, because they don't have gas, because they don't have the acid reflux or heartburn, or the old Pepto-Bismol commercials, like nausea, heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea, like that whole thing, like those are what we sort of associate with being like the obvious digestive symptoms, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that I see women make is assuming, well, I don't have any of those symptoms, so my gut health is great. No. If you have symptoms like fibroids, anxiety, depression, PMS, mood swings, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, iron deficiency, this is a big one, not just related to heavy periods, but there's definitely a connection, don't get me wrong. Skin issues like acne, rosacea, eczema, psoriasis, dandruff. Rosacea, I'm seeing a lot more of lately, just as a side note. Autoimmunity, so that could be rheumatoid arthritis, that could be Hashimoto's, any thyroid issues, frankly, whether that's thyroid nodules or a hypothyroid in particular, joint pain or stiffness, headaches or migraines on a frequent basis. If you get the odd headache here and there, I'm not really too fussed about that. But if you're getting headaches several times a week or even on a daily basis, and migraines are frequent as well, there's something to be said about what's happening in your gut. Muscle pain, if you have an itchy anus, especially at night, poor immune function, like you're getting sick often, totally normal to get sick about once a year. We want to give your immune system that break. But if you're getting sick 2, 3 more times a year, there's something happening with your gut there. Your immune system lives in your gut, so we've got to take a look at what's happening there. If you get recurrent yeast infections or bacterial vaginosis, recurrent UTIs, urinary tract infections, or bladder infections, if you have food sensitivities, if you struggle with insomnia, any of these symptoms, if you're constantly fatigued or exhausted, these all tie back to the gut. So please don't make the mistake of thinking, and I'm assuming, but I don't like to make assumptions. And again, a lot of you still haven't dropped anything into the chat. So this is really going to inhibit my ability to provide you with really specific insights and guidance today. But please don't make that mistake of thinking, well, I don't have any of those symptoms. I'm assuming that because you're here, this is a gut focused masterclass, you probably have some digestive symptoms. So again, if you could please open up the chat and drop in there what the symptoms are, whether it is digestive related, hormone related health, whatever, what have you, anxiety, fatigue, food sensitivities. Okay, interesting. Definitely connected to the gut. Where was I going? I just lost my train of thought completely. So if you do not have those symptoms, it doesn't mean something's not happening in your gut, right? Like those obvious digestive symptoms. The other thing that I find too, and this is a conversation actually that came up last week in the Hormone Healing Hub with some of the ladies that I'm working with in there, and that is a lot of the time when I'm working with a woman and we're doing some work on supporting digestive health and function, we've maybe run a GI map test, for example, and we've seen some things coming up, and we're starting to provide some supports, and we do a follow-up a couple of weeks later, and I hear things like, I didn't even realize I was bloated before, but I feel like my stomach is flatter. Or things like, man, like I'm actually having bowel movements more regularly and it doesn't feel as difficult. Like we get caught up in this idea of that's just my normal. Like that's how I feel. That's normal for me. That's typical. That's just my body. It is not normal. It's not normal to be bloated. It's not normal to be constipated. By the way, we should actually be defining what constipation is because there's a lot of women walking around constipated and they don't even know it. Extreme bloating, fibroids, iron deficiency, endometrioma, heavy periods, pelvic pain. Yeah. So interestingly, the fibroids, iron deficiency, heavy periods, I'm going to assume that you're also completely exhausted. I call that the suprafecta. Those four together, you have to be digging deep into your gut to get to the bottom of all of those things because they are all very strongly interconnected, right? And then you add in the pelvic pain, the endometrioma. Yeah. So I hear that often, right? You know, we get in there, we start supporting the gut, and all of a sudden it's like, I didn't even realize I was bloated, right? So it might feel like you're normal. It is not normal to feel that way, okay? Now, with constipation, I think it's really important that we talk about this a little bit because you know, even doctors will say, "Oh, it's totally normal if you have a bowel movement, you know, once twice a week. That's normal." That's not normal. Like think about it. I'm assuming, again, maybe I shouldn't make assumptions, but I'm assuming you eat every day, right? Like you're eating probably multiple times a day if you're nourishing your body well, three, maybe four times a day, maybe more if you're having extra snacks and stuff. Tell me how it's not normal to have some kind of elimination when you've got all these inputs coming into your body on a daily basis, right? So let's talk about the constipation piece for a little bit because this is so critical. You should be having at least one bowel movement, complete bowel movement every single day. By the way, you can still be having a bowel movement every day and be constipated because it's also about transit time. But let me shelf that for just a moment. And we'll come back to a complete bowel movement. A complete bowel movement, you're eliminating from your wrist to your elbow. That length, the diameter of about a toonie. If you're not in Canada, if you were to take your index and middle finger, put them together, like that's about the diameter that you're looking, or the circumference rather, what you're looking for in terms of elimination. So that length and that diameter, that circumference, every day you should be eliminating that. And that might be twice a day. So over the course of two bowel movements, that's how much you're eliminating, right? It should be snake-like S shape, maybe like a coil in shape, in sort of like, just to give you, I know it's gross talking about poop, but it's so important to talk about poop. That's what it should look like. It might float initially and then it should sink to the bottom. It's going to be medium brown in color. It should be easy to pass. You shouldn't be having to strain, like holding on to the sides of the counters for dear life, trying to push it out. It should not be difficult to pass. It shouldn't be overly smelly. Now, yes, there's going to be a smell. It's waste product, but you shouldn't be in this position of like staying in the bathroom for half an hour because you don't want anybody else following you in there, or you have all of the room sprays or perfumes or what have you in the bathroom because it's just it's a stink in there after the fact. There's going to be some smell. It's waste product, but it shouldn't be overpoweringly so. Okay. So let's also talk about this idea that you could be having bowel movements on a daily basis, but still being constipated, right? If you're having a daily bowel movement, that's great. That's really important. Your transit time, so the time that you eat a food to the time that the waste product leaves your body, should be between 18 and 24 hours. How in the heck can you test that? There's two tests, and you can do it at home, and it's so easy and it costs you nothing except to buy a couple of foods. A beet test, or you can use corn. So with beets or corn, whichever you choose, you eat about a cup of it at lunchtime, and then you wait to see how long it takes to see that in your stool. So with beets, you're going to see your stool turn like a reddish kind of color, like not blood, but there's going to be like a dark sort of plum sort of tinge to your stool. And you want to see that happen between 18 and 24 hours. So you're going to time when do you first start noticing that color change and when do you stop noticing that color change. If it's more than 24 hours, start and stop, that's a problem. You're actually constipated. Same thing with corn. So if the cup of corn at lunch, because I find when I eat beets, I never get that change in my stool. When I eat corn, I definitely see the corn because it's an indigestible fiber. So you'll see the bits of corn in your stool. So you can do corn at lunch and then time. When do you start seeing the corn in your stool? When do you stop seeing the corn in your stool? And that should be within an 18 to 24 hour window. constipation, bloating, gas, anxiety, and adenomyosis, pardon me, flu-like symptoms the week before ovulation. Oh, so the week before ovulation, not the week before your period, which is more common to see. So that's interesting. That's going to be a result of inflammation that's happening with the fluctuations of your hormones that occur prior to ovulation, because we have a surge in estrogen that happens, as well as a surge in testosterone, and that's going to exacerbate inflammation that's happening in your body, chronic inflammation that's happening. And inflammation, the largest internal source of inflammation is your gut. Okay. Adenomyosis, you have to be looking at the gut. So endometriosis, adenomyosis, endometriomas, you have to be looking at your gut, because with endometriosis and adenomyosis in particular, these are autoimmune-like in nature, right? This is what the literature is telling us now about these conditions. They are autoimmune-like, right? They share a lot of the same characteristics as autoimmune conditions and diseases. So they're autoimmune, like 80%, 80, 90% of the immune system lives in the gut. And there's also other ways that the gut influences endometriosis and adenomyosis. Overgrowths produce lipopolysaccharides, and lipopolysaccharides influence in endometriosis in particular. It triggers the lesions and adhesions. And so it really aggravates that growth and creates symptoms. So the gut is hugely important. I should have mentioned at the beginning, I'm going with the flow here today. I've got some notes, but I have not scripted out this webinar. So if I kind of go off on a bit of a tangent, I'll come back, I promise. I'm also really looking over here at the chat because I want to see what it is that you are sharing so I can keep it really relevant for you, okay? So I was planning to talk about constipation and what a good bowel movement looks like a little bit later on, but it seemed relevant in the moment. So there you have it. One thing that I want to touch on, which I've shared a little bit here already, is our entire health stems from our gut. So you might have heard, all health starts from the gut, and Hippocrates is the one that originally said this. And it's true. Everything is influenced by the health of our gut. And then there's external influences that impact gut health. But everything starts in the gut. Our immune system is influenced by the gut. Our hormones hugely influenced by the gut. So our periods, our moods, all of those things. Our nervous system. Now there's a bit of a bi-directional communication that happens between the gut and our nervous system. So that's what I was sort of talking about. There's other influences that are going to impact our gut. The nervous system is going to impact our gut. Our gut is going to impact the nervous system. Our circadian rhythm, energy and metabolism is impacted by gut health. So if you're a person who struggles with weight, for example, you've got stubborn weight, but you're eating well, you're moving your body in an appropriate way, and you're like, why won't this weight shed? There's something going on in your gut. I actually did a whole class on this inside the Hormone Healing Hub. The recording is available there. The gut is hugely involved in weight gain, huge, and metabolism, cognition, thyroid function. Our T4 to T3 conversion happens in two major places, the liver and the gut. Actually, it's really hard to talk about the gut without also talking about the liver. So I may just sort of bring that in from time to time today, but we'll sort of try and table that also for next month, not next month, April, when I talk about detoxification as well, more specifically. Your emotional regulation and responses, so anxiety, depression, mood swings, serotonin, GABA, dopamine, these are the neurotransmitters that influence our mood. They're produced in the gut, right? They're not produced in the brain. So when we have inflammation in the gut, when we've got dysbiosis, when we have these overgrowths, those neurotransmitters are not being made, and you're going to feel those sorts of symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, those sorts of things, okay? Your hair, skin, and nails. I've seen so many women, and I've had so many women reaching out to me recently talking about hair loss or hair thinning that has been happening. Okay, even cardiovascular function is connected to the gut. And this is actually a really important point. As women, especially if you are sort of in that perimenopausal window, right? 35 and up, especially in your 40s, where You're probably hearing a lot more about bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, BHRT, right? And estrogen in particular. And for decades, we were warned against using estrogen and how it's going to cause things like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, right? By the way, that's all been debunked so many times over. It's ridiculous. And yet we still have that. We still have that narrative, right? We still have that fear. Don't get caught up in that narrative because it's been debunked. Read the book Estrogen Matters. That's a really great place to start. But the other thing to think of too, when we're speaking on cardiovascular function, the number one killer of women is heart disease, not breast cancer. So cardiovascular function is hugely connected to gut health also. Okay. You brought up adhesions. I think I have them from past births. How might they impact those issues? Um, so what issues in particular? So with adhesions, when you have adhesions and you have lesions, if we're talking, endometriosis, for example, okay, bloating, constipation issues. So the adhesions and the lesions aren't necessarily going to impact gut health unless the lesions and adhesions are happening on the bowel, which can happen, and that's a very common place for that to occur. So in endometriosis, not adenomyosis, but in endometriosis, we have these growths that occur outside of the uterus. So it is tissue that is very similar to the endometrial lining that grows outside of the uterus. So the most common places for that to happen are the uterus, the fallopian tubes, the bladder, the bowel. So kind of in that pelvic region. It's frankly been found on the lungs, even in the brain. So it can grow anywhere. And what happens is those lesions and adhesions are their own, it's almost like they're their own little organ in a way. But they react and respond to the fluctuations in our hormones. And that's where women with endometriosis really get a lot of those symptoms that they experience, the pain, the heavy flow, a lot of that chronic inflammation, because those lesions and adhesions, they're going to bleed, right? They're going to bleed. And because they're not in the uterus, it has nowhere to go. So it creates a lot of inflammation locally and systemically. And you're going to get scar tissue as well in that particular case. Now, if you have those lesions and adhesions on your bowel, you're going to experience potentially the symptoms like bloating and constipation. Does that make sense? Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if I just lost you or if I said too much and now you're confused. Just let me know. Yes. Okay, good. You're welcome. Okay, perfect. So here's what I'd really love to know, because another thing that's been coming up a lot over the last week, and I had a few of you, I don't know if any of you live or someone who sent me an email along these lines or have reached out to me on Instagram along these lines, but one thing that's come up very frequently over the last couple of weeks, and I've been having this conversation as well with some of my ladies inside the Hormone Healing Hub, is, well, I've done the tests, I've worked with the practitioners, I've taken the supplements, I've followed the protocols, I've removed the foods, like what am I missing? I still, it's not working because I still have the bloating and the gas and the constipation and my fibroids are still there and I still have heavy periods and I'm getting the migraine still, and on and on and on and on and on. So it's kind of like I've done it all. So what else are you going to tell me that I can do that I haven't done already? Right? So I would love to know, if you are in that camp of, I've already done so much, what the hell else can I possibly do? Drop that into the chat for me, because this has become a really important conversation piece, because there's sort of a two-pronged response to that. Number one, I have no idea what you've done. Unless you've specifically worked with me, I don't know what you've done. I don't know what protocols you've followed. I don't know who you've worked with. I don't know all of the things that you've followed through on, tests that you may have potentially run. So part of that is, it's really difficult for me to say, well, this is the one thing that you missed, right? The other piece of that is if what you are doing is just removing foods or just taking a probiotic or just taking supplements, there's a lot that can be done. And we'll dive into that today for sure. Yes, feeling like I've done so much. I'm really curious if you're open to sharing, not just you, Alice, but everybody else that's here. I would love to know what it is that you have done, because that will help to, it will really allow me to speak a little bit more specifically around what might be missing. Okay. So here's just a couple of things though, because I get this feeling of like, I've done everything. So what the heck else could I have possibly done? Let's talk first about what doesn't work to quote, heal the gut. Okay. Just removing all the foods. So this always, when I see someone say to me, I have food sensitivities, somebody had said that earlier, and it was like a trigger in my brain to come back to food sensitivities. And what tends to happen is you just remove the food, right? You just remove the food. So say, for example, it's like cauliflower. Every time you eat legumes, this is a really good example. Every time you eat legumes, you get bloated and gassy. So you just stop eating the legumes, right? But then what happens when it becomes, now it's all of the cruciferous vegetables. It's cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cabbage. Now it's apples and onions, and like your food list starts to shrink and shrink and shrink. Here's the thing. First of all, just removing the foods, that's not the problem. The food is not the problem. It is the very likely bacterial, parasitic, or fungal overgrowths that are hanging out in your gut that are eating that food and off-gassing and fermenting that food, causing that symptom. So just removing the food, it gives you that temporary relief, perhaps, because you're no longer feeding that particular bacteria, that particular food that it's like totally gorging and loving. But it's going to start eating other foods and ferment those other foods and cause more symptoms for you, because it's the bacteria that's the problem ultimately, not the food or the parasite or the fungus, for example, right? If what you're taking, or if what you're doing rather, is just taking probiotics. So you go to the health food store, you take a probiotic. You've read about, Saccharomyces boulardii or acidophilus or bifidobacterium, and you're like, oh, yeah, I need those strains. That applies to me. And you start going and you're just buying random strains of probiotics. If you have an overgrowth, a bacterial overgrowth, for example, if you have SIBO, throwing more bacteria in there can actually fuel the fire and make things so much worse. The other thing is, I'm pro probiotics. Don't get me wrong. I use probiotics. I put them in my formula, not my formulas, my protocols for my clients, but they're very specific to the objective that we are trying to achieve in that particular strategy or step of the strategy that we are working on, right? The other thing that I see is women who just take L-glutamine, or they're drinking bone broth, for example, thinking, well, L-glutamine, I read all about how L-glutamine helps to heal and seal the gut. Cool, very true, it does. There are so many other nutrients that do that, and you need to have a comprehensive approach. The other thing that you need to think about too is you probably do have leaky gut. Most people do. In all of the GI maps that I run, all of the patterns of leaky gut come up. But if you have H. pylori, for example, SIBO, a parasite, trying to heal a leaky gut when you've got an infection is going to do you absolutely no good, because it's kind of the best analogy I've ever been able to come up with in this regard is, think of L-glutamine like the wallpaper you're trying to put up over your wall. Okay, like we're trying to heal and smooth things out, right? We're closing those gaps, if you will, right? So we're trying to put the wallpaper up. But if you have inflammation that's happening in your gut, if you have a bacterial overgrowth, if you have a parasitic overgrowth, if you have candida, for example, they're just coming in there and they're like sandpaper, sanding down that beautiful wallpaper that you're trying to put up. There's an order of operations that has to happen in terms of healing the gut. That makes sense? And then with bone broth is so good for you. So, so, so good for you. But again, it's not going to solve for infections. If you have a histamine problem, so if you have a histamine overgrowth, you're going to know because you're getting headaches and migraines regularly, you feel brain foggy, you may have allergy type symptoms, so like the itchy, watery eyes, the runny nose, those sorts of things. Um, Bone broth is actually adding fuel to that fire. It's going to stimulate that histamine response. Same thing with fermented foods. I love using fermented foods. It's great, but same warning, same cautionary tale with the histamine piece. Okay. And fermented foods aren't going to take care of any potential infections or overgrowths. And because they're, a food-based probiotic, if you've got, just like I said earlier, if all you're doing is taking a probiotic, that could be fueling the fire if you've already got an overgrowth. Same thing with fermented foods. Okay, or those random kits that you can find at health food stores, right? Like the gut cleanse kits and all of that stuff. My gosh, those things don't do anything. They don't do anything. Like the little parasite cleanses, the candida cleanses, like those sorts of things. It's like the 15-day or 30-day cleanse. Mm. You're welcome to do it if you want to. I would not spend your money bothering to do that because that's, again, where you're going to feel like I've done it all and nothing is working, right? You got acid reflux all the time and burning feeling left side. So left side acid reflux, I'd be looking at H. pylori. And I'd also be looking at whether or not you're producing sufficient stomach acid, because 99% of the time it is insufficient stomach acid, not an overproduction of stomach acid, that is contributing to things like heartburn and acid reflux. Because if you're not producing enough stomach acid, things sit there longer and they start to ferment. And it's that fermentation that creates that reflux sensation for you. Okay. All right. Is this all landing so far? Is this making sense? Seeing that there is like okay, it's gone. Very helpful. Okay, good. All right, good. Amazing. I love that. Okie dokie. Perfect. Now, I'm going to assume, again, I shouldn't assume, but I'm going to assume that because you're here, again, it's a gut-focused masterclass with the added little piece of also supporting your hormones. And if you've been in my world for any length of time, you followed me on social media, for example, you get my emails, what have you, you're probably getting them because you've got something going on with your hormones in your period, right? So I want to just take a moment and talk about, because I highlighted very quickly a little bit earlier that our hormones are hugely impacted by our gut. And I want to talk about why, because it's one thing for me to say, you need to heal your gut to heal your hormones, but it's quite another for me to explain to you why. Because if you can really understand and start connecting some of these pieces, this is what I love to do, is connect the pieces and help for you to understand why this is all critical. Because if you don't understand it, it's just going to be one more of these things that you're like, okay, yeah, whatever, right? We've got to make these connections so you can really start to, oh my God, my gut really is an important piece of the puzzle. I've got to start doing some of these things, right? So let's talk about how your period, your hormones are influenced by your gut. First of all, a few of you mentioned iron deficiency. I see this, oh my gosh, in so many of the women. I would say most of the women that I work with, they're coming to me with heavy periods, endometriosis, adenomyosis, fibroids, and they're also all iron deficient as a result, right? So many, like most of the women that I work with are iron deficient, not all, but most. And here's the thing, so many of them have been in this position of, well, I supplement with iron. My doctor told me to take Ferromax. My naturopath told me to supplement with heme iron. I go for iron infusions. And, the iron infusion, it'll boost my ferritin levels up for, a month, 2 months. And then I have to go back for another one. The supplements aren't doing anything for me. And there's a reason for that. And you need to hear this, okay? If you're iron deficient, you need to hear this and you need to understand this. If you have an overgrowth of H. pylori, which is a bacteria that lives in the stomach, or you have a parasite, Those two little critters use iron to grow. They munch up all that iron. And I see H. pylori all the freaking time on the GI maps that I run with my clients, all the time. I would say at least 90% of them, 90 to 95% of the GI maps that I get back have H. pylori, right? And that H. pylori is just gobbling up that iron. I also see parasites come up, and those parasites are just going to gobble up that iron. So that is why you can be supplementing with iron, you can be going for your iron infusions and still not feel like you're making any headway long term in a sustainable way with your ferritin levels on your blood work. Okay. So that is such an important piece to understand. So don't get caught up in thinking, well, I have a heavy period, that's why I'm iron deficient. I get that. Iron deficiency also causes heavy periods. So there's a bit of a vicious cycle that you end up in. But if you're ultimately not getting to the bottom of why you have the heavy period, why you have iron deficiency to begin with, both of which are going to stem from the gut, you're going to continue to go down this cycle of heavy periods, iron deficiency, exhaustion, getting your infusion, having a boost for a month or two, and then just dropping right back into that cycle again. Okay. So that's a really important piece to understand. Infections and leaky gut. So intestinal hyperpermeability, but leaky gut is, commonly used and understood. Those are going to increase inflammation. And inflammation is at the root of all hormonal and period problems. When you are inflamed, when there's chronic inflammation, and the gut is the biggest internal source of inflammation, when there's inflammation, your progesterone, your ovulation, first of all, gets inhibited. So you do not produce progesterone and you end up in an estrogen dominant state, right? And when you're in that estrogen dominant state, you're going to have the heavy, long, painful periods, iron deficiency, PMS, mood swings, breast pain, tenderness, all of those sorts of things, right? And then we've got beta-glucuronidase. So there are bacteria in our gut. So the overgrowth bacteria, not the good bacteria, the quote, bad bacteria. There's certain strains of bacteria that if they are overgrown, they will produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. And what beta-glucuronidase does is it sends estrogen back into circulation instead of eliminating it, right? So estrogen is a use it and lose it hormone. We want estrogen. We need estrogen. We have estrogen receptors on every single cell in our body, from our head to our toes, right? Every cell has a receptor for estrogen. Estrogen is going to affect our brain health, our cardiovascular health and function, our immune health, hair, skin, and nails, lubrication. So thinking like your joints, your eyes, your vagina, all of it, right? We need estrogen. But then we want it to do its thing and get the heck out, right? And we eliminate estrogen through our poop. So having regular bowel movements is really important, but also is making sure that you're not sending it back into circulation because you have an overgrowth of those bacteria, right? If you have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, this is bacteria that has migrated from the large intestine to the small intestine. This is where you may have been told, you have to do a low FODMAP diet and you have to remove all of the foods and that sort of thing. First of all, you got to get rid of the bacteria, not just the food. The food isn't the problem, it's the bacteria that's the problem. So get rid of that. There is a connection between SIBO and H. pylori. So if you have both of those happening, that is really important to understand and be aware of. There's also a connection between Candida and some SIBO bacteria as well. They create a stronger biofilm and it can be harder to get rid of. So this is the other thing too, if you've had SIBO and you've done a protocol for a month, maybe 2 months, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. It's going to take some time to get rid of those bacteria. Same thing with H. pylori and Candida. It's a process, right? And just coming back to endometriosis, there's a huge connection between SIBO and endometriosis. Huge. So many women with endometriosis have SIBO. And there's a lot of women with SIBO who haven't even considered that it could actually be an endometriosis diagnosis also. And then we have lipopolysaccharides that can be produced by the bacteria the bad bacteria in our gut that cause inflammation and autoimmunity. So LPS is very common to see in endometriosis, and this is a really prime reason why focusing on the gut is so important with endometriosis. Okay. So this is why, I'll say things like our hormones aren't the bad guy, right? We're so quick to say, I have heavy periods, I have fibroids, I have, breast pain and tenderness, I must be estrogen dominant, I've got to do something about my hormones. We've got to look at why your hormones are problematic to begin with. And they're influenced by the gut, by inflammation in the gut, by the bacteria in the gut that could be sending estrogen back into circulation, by the lipopolysaccharides that are causing inflammation, that are inhibiting ovulation and progesterone production, imbalancing your hormones, right? Does that make sense? We also have to think too about when we're talking about hormones, we have to think about other things like inflammation, blood sugar regulation, insulin. And please also don't make the mistake of thinking, well, I'm not diabetic, so I don't need to worry about insulin. Please don't do that, because insulin is at the root of hormones also, and that's where inflammation starts and metabolic dysregulation starts. So blood sugar and insulin are super critical. Your liver, metabolism, detoxification also are going to influence your hormones, your circadian rhythm, your nervous system regulation, your adrenal health, your brain ovarian connection, because it's your brain that tells your ovaries to ovulate, right? Let me just come over here. Histamine response is something I'm learning about more. I'm watching this for myself and my daughter. Thank you. You're welcome. Did iron infusion, my lips turned pink again. Yay, but felt like I should be able to raise my iron differently. Yes. So here's the thing. If you are eating a lot of iron-rich foods, so specifically if you are eating red meats, right? Like you can get iron from things like spinach and beets, but not in appreciable amounts. And you also need to make sure in that case that you're getting enough vitamin C. And vitamin C is really difficult to get from food alone in really appreciable amounts. So red meat is the best food source of iron, and even actually organ meats. So liver, kidney, heart, those sorts of things, which I will be honest with you, I just cannot stand the taste. I cannot stand the taste. But those are great ways to get iron in. You can do encapsulated organ meats. Please make sure if you're doing organ meats that you're getting organic pasteurized grass-fed. That's really, really important, okay? So that's going to be really necessary. But also the other thing, I was looking into this recently, and a lot of those capsules that are organ meat capsules, really great source of nutrients, a lot of vitamins, vitamin A, your CoQ10 is going to be in there, zinc, but the iron content is actually really low. It's almost insignificant in a lot of them. So just be aware and pay attention to that, because I think a lot of times people just jump to, well, I don't want to eat the organ meat, so I'm going to get the capsule. And that's a great way, don't get me wrong, of also kind of getting in some of your, vitamins and minerals for sure. So instead of taking like a multivitamin, for example, or multi-mineral, that's a great alternative. You need to take usually at 6 capsules of those. But if it's really for the iron support, you're not really going to get that from those capsules. Just a bit of an aside there. And then H. pylori, how to get rid of it? Only definitely not. No. I have protocols for H. pylori. So there are very specific nutrients that target H. pylori. There are very specific strains of probiotics that target H. pylori. We also need to be thinking about biofilms. We also need to be looking at whether or not there's candida present, because if you have candida, H. pylori hides in yeast. So it becomes a really important thing to look at the bigger picture and not just automatically assume that it's H. pylori and target that, because again, you're going to feel like, oh, I took the mastic gum and it didn't do anything. Probably because there's a lot more to it than just assuming one nutrient is going to take care of the problem. We have to be looking at the bigger picture. Okay. So coming back to, I've tried everything, but nothing is working, right? And we sort of talked about this a little bit more. What does everything mean? Have you just been taking the supplements and probiotics, but you haven't really been following any particular strategic plan? Have you just removed foods because you thought, well, the legumes are causing me symptoms, so I stopped eating legumes. The symptoms went away for a little while, but then they came back and now I'm bloated and gassy again, right? Have you done testing to know what's going on? Have you done testing and worked with a practitioner who can look at that and not just see data on a paper, but also integrate you into that piece, into that strategy, into that plan? Have you worked with a practitioner who can look at that information and develop a strategic protocol and plan that doesn't just include supplements? Have you looked at your secretory IgA levels? Because if you have H. pylori and you also have very low secretory IgA or SIG-A, you've got to boost your SIG-A first. There's an order that has to happen, right? Does that all make sense? We had our little poop talk. And then the other thing to think about too is, have you integrated things like eating appropriately? If all you're doing is removing the food groups, like if you've removed carbs, there's still so many women that aren't eating carbohydrates. And it's the carbohydrates that are going to feed the good bacteria. So get carbohydrates that are going to help to fuel your nervous system, your thyroid, right? So removing whole food groups like that is going to be really problematic. Are you chewing your food? It's incredible to me how many women don't chew your food. Like you're taking these massive bites, you chew maybe 3, 4, 5 times, and then you're swallowing. It's like you're practically swallowing the. And listen, I have done this. Okay, I know this because I've done this. So this is not like judgy. I get it. Okay. Like so often women, especially when you're in like this sort of sandwich generation where, you've got your kids that you're raising, you've got a career, maybe you've got aging parents that you're taking care of. You've got like all of these responsibilities and everything is like always go, 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 go. And you're eating on the run and you're like eating over the sink instead of at the table. You take like 3, 4 bites, you're swallowing, the food is practically still whole and intact. Sometimes you're putting the next bite in before you've gotten the previous bite finished and swallowed. It's still in your mouth. If you're not chewing your food, this is the only place where you have teeth. Right? We don't have teeth in our stomach. We don't have teeth in our intestines. There's chemical digestion that happens the rest of the way down, but we need to make sure that we're breaking that food down with our teeth mechanically first, right? Are you drinking too much with meals? My husband is awful with this. Like he uses his it's usually water. He uses his water at dinner to swallow his food instead of chewing it sufficiently, right? Are there a lot of pesticides and glyphosate on the food that you're eating? Are you consuming a lot of refined grains and sugars, dairy, gluten, seed oils? Do you drink a lot of alcohol or caffeine? Do you smoke? Or get a lot of secondhand smoke because smoking is going to reduce your stomach acid? Are you taking a lot of medications? Because most medications are going to have some sort of impact on the gut. Hormonal birth control is going to do that as well. Do you have a high toxic load? How's your liver functioning? Because your liver is going to be really important in supporting digestive health and function too. Partially because of the relationship between the liver and the gallbladder, where we have bile production, and bile is necessary for estrogen elimination as well as for fat digestion. Bile is also a natural antimicrobial, right? Are there infections? And then the biggest piece is your nervous system. Because remember I talked about there's a bi-directional communication that happens between your gut and your nervous system. If you feel like you're doing all of the things for your gut, but you're burning the candle at both ends, you feel like you're constantly racing from one thing to the next, you're exhausted, you're wired and tired, you feel burnt out, you're overwhelmed, you're just like go, go, go all of the time. You're filling your to-do calendar. You're saying yes to everything. You have zero boundaries. You're constantly scrolling on social media. You're on screens in the evening. Like I could go on and on and on. But when your nervous system is dysregulated, all of the supplements that you're taking for your gut, the protocols, all of that, it's not going to do you a world of good because your nervous system is dysregulated. That creates inflammation and that shuts down digestive function. Okay. That's a really big piece that a lot of women miss. And the other thing too is our stomach acid production and our enzyme production naturally starts to decrease as we age, unfortunately. So from about 35 on, we start to see drops in our stomach acid and our enzyme production. So a lot of women really benefit from supporting those externally. Okay. And that could look like apple cider vinegar or bitters before meals. It could look like taking enzymes. It could look like eating bitter foods that support enzyme production, especially within the liver the liver, the pancreas, the gallbladder, things like arugula, dandelion, bitter melon, artichoke, radishes, cranberries, even olives as well. Spacing your meals appropriately is really important to support your migrating motor complex. You're not eating like every 2 hours. 4 hours is a good time period, right? You've got to be eating resistant starches also. I love green banana flour, plantains, Jerusalem artichokes, things like that, cooked and cooled white rice, cooked and cooled potatoes, for example. You've got to be eating enough fiber. So loading your plate up with produce and drinking enough water, 3 to 6 liters daily, and eating undistracted, not in this go, 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 always in a rush sort of environment, right? Not eating 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed, enjoying things like ginger and fennel and peppermint and caraway to support digestion, right? And then always, always, always look at functional testing so you can rule out those infections or rule in. I've never gotten back a GI map where there hasn't been some kind of infection present. Like I said, I see H. pylori 90 to 95% of the time. I see patterns of SIBO often. I see dysbiosis, so overgrowth of the bad bacteria all the time. Every single GI map I get back has an overgrowth, every single one. I see parasites regularly. I see candida as well. We've got to rule all of that out. Right? When should you? Because this often is sort of the next question. Well, how do I know if I should be testing? How do I know if that's something that I should be considering doing? Well, if you have iron deficiency, you should definitely be looking at what's happening in your gut. Remember, I mentioned earlier, if there's H. pylori or if there's parasites, they're feeding on that iron. We have to know why. We have to know why you're not absorbing the iron. Why not? Are you feeding one of those infections? Do you have leaky gut so you're not absorbing? Is there a lot of inflammation? Where's that coming from? You need to look. Endometriosis and adenomyosis. Autoimmunity. There's a huge connection between the gut and autoimmunity. Again, because of that, the immune system largely lives in the gut. Massive connection. If you have mood disorders, anxiety, panic attacks, depression, mood swings, PMS, estrogen dominance, so heavy, long, painful periods, fibroids, etc., hypothyroidism, because again, that T4 to T3 conversion, two major places that happen, the gut and the liver. Any of the signs and symptoms that we've talked about today, gut or otherwise, including food sensitivities, whether those are new or worsening, if you're not having complete bowel movements, and when you feel like you've tried everything but nothing's working. How accurate are GI map tests? They are. So I've used a few different tests in my practice. GI map, hands down, most sensitive, most specific and accurate test that I've used. Hands down. Okay, so I've used the Biome Effects. I used that for a couple of years and it's okay, but it's not very sensitive, so it misses a lot. The other one that is starting to hit more is Vitract. Very similar to the Biome Effects, actually, but there's pieces that it doesn't measure. So it doesn't measure H. pylori, it doesn't measure parasites. So that's problematic because you're missing huge pieces of information there. The GI map I have found to be the most accurate and gives us the best starting point for creating a solid strategy forward. Okay. All right. Is this helping? Is this making sense? Any last questions? Feel free to put them into the chat and I'm going to start to wrap up. What is your opinion on repeat or metabolic eating? Listen, there are so many different diets or theories around how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, and all of that sort of jazz. I think it's so important. And listen, the other thing too is there's no one diet for all, 9 billion people that are in the planet, right? What we've got to look at is what is happening in your gut, what foods are going to be most beneficial based on what you've got happening in your digestive system. What's your metabolic function like? What's your insulin capacity? That's a really important piece of the puzzle too. And we've got to look at all of those pieces and determine what's the best way for you to eat. I am not a fan of these like diet, whether it's zone diet or keto or like paleo is actually pretty good. So is the Mediterranean. I hate the word diet, but a lot of these very restrictive diets, even like the autoimmune protocol, it to some degree can be quite restrictive and shouldn't necessarily be something that you do for a long period of time. What's the other one? Like low FODMAP, right? Low FODMAP is another one, right? It's too restrictive. It is not something that is meant to be done long term, perhaps therapeutically for a very short period of time, but not forever. We have to look at what is happening in your gut and what you are capable of eating and doing. Hopefully that made sense. Is all this come in GI map? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Like the GI map doesn't tell you what to eat. Like it doesn't come back and say, oh, this is the diet that you should take and all of the foods that you should eat and all of the supplements that you should eat. Like that's not how the GI map works. That is, you have to be working with a functional practitioner that can put all of that together for you based on the data that comes back in a GI map, based on data that comes in on blood work or other testing that you're doing, based on information that the practitioners, they should be doing a really thorough health history and intake with you, and not just looking at data on a piece of paper, right? Makes sense? How would you approach getting rid of parasites? I would apply a parasite protocol. But I'd also be looking first, if you have low secretory IgA, I would be supporting your secretory IgA first, because that is your internal defense. That's like your army. If you don't have an army to support you in an eradication effort, like getting rid of parasites, for example, you're not going to be successful. If you have H. pylori, we actually have to get rid of the H. pylori first before going after parasites. If you don't, you're not going to be successful. So the approach is dependent on the person. But ultimately, you're going to get to a point where you're doing a parasite protocol. And you've got to be looking at the adult parasites, you've got to be looking at the larvae, you've got to be looking at the eggs. You have to be going through 2 full moon cycles with a parasite protocol. You need binders, you need biofilm busters as well. Really important. You're so welcome. So where do we go from here? You can go on ahead and keep on doing what you're doing. I wish you all the best if that's what you decide you want to do. You can start implementing some of the things that we've talked about today. So maybe you want to go and do the transit test, for example, and see what that looks like. Maybe you want to start experimenting with actually chewing your food, right? You can come join me in the Hormone Healing Hub. This is my membership, my monthly membership. Month 2 is a 4-week digestive reset. And then we're also going to dig into some of the other core root causes of hormonal imbalances, that brain ovarian communication that I talked about, metabolism, blood sugar, and insulin that we spoke about, the nervous system and adrenal resiliency, liver function and detoxification, weekly coaching calls and ask me anythings. So you've got tons of support. And it's just $97 a month. And that's Canadian, actually. So in US dollars, I think that's about like $70 US, maybe. And that's less than a night out. Like that's less than date night. That's less than your daily Starbucks habit. And then there's access to functional testing, like the GI map as well, and working with me privately. And there's preferred rates in the Hormone Healing Hub as well. And I've also created a brand new guide that is going to be coming in. It actually is there already as a bonus in the hub when you join this week. It is a 5-step plan with over 50 tips, suggestions, action steps, recommendations to support your gut health. So that's a bonus that you'll get free in addition to month 2, which is the 4-week digestive reset. All of that in the Hormone Healing Hub. So what I'm going to do, if that is something that's of interest to you, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to that into the chat. Let's see if this will work for me. Okay, so it looks like it came in as a clickable link. If one of you wouldn't mind just clicking on that link and letting me know if you're able to, like if it opens, let's just make sure it opens. Whether you need to click it and it'll open in your browser, or you might need to copy and paste it into your browser. If you can just let me know that that's working. It opened. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So that's an option. And then the last option is to work with me privately through my Women's Health Virtual Clinic, running a GI map test. So this would be for you if you're just really not into the whole group thing. You really aren't all that interested in getting to the root cause of your hormone issues. You're really just hyper focused on your gut health. This would be the better option for you. It is 100% customized to you and your body. You get the GI map test. You get answers. This is so important. So you know what's going on inside of your body that is contributing to all of the symptoms that you're experiencing. You'll have the strategy, you'll have the plan, all designed based on what your gut needs. Okay, so that would be another option. So I will also drop that link into the chat for you as well. All right, cool. So that looks like it came up as a clickable link also. So you might choose to keep those links open. You can read through them now while we're here and ask me questions. You can keep them open to have a read through after the class today. That's completely fine. And then you can drop any questions that you have into the chat. It is 2 minutes after the hour. Yes, I was really trying to keep this to an hour today, and we just went a teeny tiny bit over, so that's okay. If you have any questions, you can drop those into the chat, whether it's anything that we spoke about today, if it's questions about the Hormone Healing Hub, if it's questions about working with me privately through the Women's Health Virtual Clinic and doing a GI test package there. I'm happy to answer those questions. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to those of you who are really participating in the chat today, asking some of those questions, sharing some of the things that you are really struggling with, that you're hoping to get answers to. I hope you got some of those answers today, or at least some insights into what might potentially be going on. And I want to thank you for spending your time with me, because I know an hour it can be a lot to ask sometimes. So I appreciate your being here with me, and for spending the time with me today, and your attention and all of your engagement. I appreciate it. Thank you for hosting this. You're so welcome. So I will hang out for another couple of minutes. If there are any other questions, you're welcome to drop them into the chat. And if there aren't any, oh, I should mention too, I try to remember to mention this at the end of every class. I'm a percolator. So I'm the person who, I'll go to a lecture, I'll listen to a seminar, I'll go to a webinar, I'll listen to a podcast or what have you. I'll go to a workshop, and in the moment, the host will say, are there any questions? And I'm sitting there like, I literally have nothing. Like my brain is just buzzing, but I have zero questions. And the moment I walk away, and it's like I remove myself from the environment, and then my brain kind of has this chance to like let it all sink in. That's where the questions come for me. Or I'll sleep on it, and then the next morning I wake up and it's like, oh, I wonder about this. Oh, what about, oh shoot, I should have asked this. That's my brain. That is totally who I am. So if you are that person too, please don't sweat it. Just reach out, okay? Send me an email, reach out to me on social media, send me a DM, and I'm happy to answer those questions there as well. Can you do a parasite protocol when you're still, no, you need to be moving any type of, that's such a good question. Such a good question. Thank you for asking that, because this is really important. If you have any type of overgrowth, so if it is H. pylori, if it's parasites, if it's bacteria, if it's candida, you cannot do an eradication protocol or a kill protocol until you get your bowels moving. And this can be really frustrating because part of the reason you're constipated is because you've got these overgrowths. But we have to make sure that your bowels are supported before, during, and after those types of eradication protocols. Because if you're killing a parasite, a bacteria, a whatever, and it has nowhere to go, it's staying in you, right? So we have to make sure your bowels are moving. This is so important. Really good question. Really good question. And there's a lot of strategies to support getting your bowels moving, whether you have an overgrowth or not. Tons of strategies. It's not just about, oh, just go eat more fiber. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. Really good question. Thank you for that. All right. Any other questions today? And like I said, so I will close this off in another minute or two. And like I said, if you have questions that are coming up for you later today, tomorrow, later this week, maybe, feel free to reach out, send me an email, reach out to me on Instagram. That's probably the better place. If you're going to reach out to me on social, reach out to me on Instagram. Not on Facebook. I don't always get notifications on Facebook, which is really annoying. So I'll find like a week goes by and then I happen to see a notification. It's like, oh, that's great. It's been a week. So I'm not ignoring you. I just have no idea that you're reaching out to me there. Whereas Instagram, I see those notifications. All right, ladies, thank you so much for joining me. And I hope this has been helpful and you've gotten some insights. And I will chat with you again soon. Reach out if you have questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care. Bye for now.